So when we left off in our last video, we were in the middle of chapter 1, and that's where we'll start right now. "I think not," said the horse. "You see, he thinks I'm dumb and witless like his other horses. Now if I really were, the moment I got loose, I'd go back home to my stable and paddock, back to his palace, which is 2 days' journey south. That's where he'll look for me. He'd never dream of my going on north on my own. And anyway, he will probably think that someone in the last village who saw him ride through has followed us to here and stolen me." "Oh, hooray," said Shasta. "Then we'll go north. I've been longing to go to the north all my life." "Of course you have," said the horse. "That's because of the blood that's in you. I'm sure you are true northern stock, but not too loud. I should think they'd be asleep soon now." "I'd better creep back and see," suggested Shasta. "That's a good idea," said the horse, "but take care you're not caught." It was a good deal darker now, and very silent, except for the sound of the waves on the beach, which Shasta hardly noticed, because he had been hearing it day and night, as long as he could remember. The cottage, as he approached it, showed no light. When he listened at the front, there was no noise. When he went round to the only window, he could hear, after a second or two, the familiar noise of the old fisherman's squeaky snore. It was funny to think that if all went well, he would never hear it again. Holding his breath and feeling a little bit sorry, but much less sorry than he was glad, Shasta glided away over the grass and went to the donkey's stable, groped along to a place he knew where the key was hidden, opened the door, and found the horse's saddle and bridle, which had been locked up there for the night. He bent forward and kissed the donkey's nose. "I'm sorry we can't take you," he said. "There you are at last," said the horse when he got back to it. "I was beginning to wonder what had become of you." "I was getting your things out of the stable," replied Shasta. "And now can you tell me how to put them on?" For the next few minutes Shasta was at work, very cautiously to avoid jingling, while the horse said things like, "Get that girth a bit tighter," or "You'll find a buckle lower down," or "You'll need to shorten those stirrups a good bit." And when all was finished, he said, "Now, we've got to have reins for the look of the thing, but you won't be using them. Tie them to the saddle bow, very slack, so that I can do what I like with my head. And remember, you are not to touch them." "What are they for, then?" said Shasta. "Ordinarily, they are for directing me," replied the horse. "But as I intend to do all the directing on this journey, you please keep your hands to yourself. And there's another thing. I'm not going to have you grabbing my mane." "But I say," pleaded Shasta, "if I'm not to hold on by the reins or by your mane, what am I to hold on by?" "You hold on with your knees," said the horse. "That's the secret of good riding. Grip my body between your knees as hard as you like. Sit straight up, straight like a poker. Keep your elbows in. And by the way, what did you do with the spurs?" "Put them on my heels, of course," said Shasta. "I do know that much." "Then you can take them off and put them in the saddlebag. We may be able to sell them when we get to Tashbaan. Ready? And now I think you can get up." "Oh, you're a dreadful height," gasped Shasta after his first and unsuccessful attempt. "I'm a horse, that's all," was the reply. "Anyone would think I was a haystack from the way you're trying to climb up me. There, that's better. Now sit up, and remember what I told you about your knees. Funny to think of me, who has led cavalry charges and won races, having a potato sack like you in the saddle. However, off we go." He chuckled, and not unkindly. And he certainly began their night journey with great caution. First of all, he went just south of the fisherman's cottage to the little river which there ran into the sea, and took great care to leave in the mud some very plain hoof marks pointing south. But as soon as they were in the middle of the ford, he turned upstream, and waited till they were about 100 yards further inland than the cottage. Then he selected a nice gravelly bit of bank which would take no footprints, and came out on the northern side. Then, still at a walking pace, he went northward till the cottage, the one tree, the donkey's stable, and the creek, everything, in fact, Shasta had ever known, had sunk out of sight in the gray summer night darkness. They had been going uphill, and now were at the top of the ridge, that ridge which had always been the boundary of Shasta's known world. He could not see what was ahead, except that it was all open and grassy. It looked endless, wild and lonely and free. "I say," observed the horse, "what a place for a gallop, eh?" "Oh, no, let's don't," said Shasta. "Not yet. I don't know how to. Please, horse, I don't know your name." "Bree-hee-hinny-brinny-hoo-hee-haw," said the horse. "I'll never be able to say that," said Shasta. "Can I call you Bree?" "Well, if it's the best you can do, I suppose you must," said the horse. "And what shall I call you?" "I'm called Shasta." Said Bree. "Well, now there's a name that's really hard to pronounce. But now about this gallop. It's a good deal easier than trotting, if you only knew, because you don't have to rise and fall. Grip with your knees and keep your eyes straight ahead between my ears. Don't look at the ground. If you think you're going to fall, just grip harder and sit up straighter. Ready? Now, for Narnia and the North. Chapter 2, A Wayside Adventure. It was nearly noon on the following day when Shasta was awakened by something warm and soft moving over his face. He opened his eyes and found himself staring into the long face of a horse. Its nose and lips were almost touching his. He remembered the exciting events of the previous night and sat up, but as he did so, he groaned. "Oh, Bree," he gasped, "I'm so sore, all over. I can hardly move." "Good morning, small one," said Bree. "I was afraid you might feel a bit stiff. It can't be the falls. You didn't have more than a dozen or so, and it was all lovely, soft, springy turf that must have been almost a pleasure to fall on. And the only one that might have been nasty was broken by that gorse bush. No, it's the riding itself that comes hard at first. What about breakfast? I've had mine." "Oh, bother breakfast. Bother everything," said Shasta. "I tell you I can't move." But the horse nuzzled at him with his nose and pawed him gently with a hoof till he had to get up. And then he looked about him and saw where they were. Behind them lay a little copse. Before them the turf, dotted with white flowers, sloped down to the brow of a cliff. Far below them, so that the sound of the breaking waves was very faint, lay the sea. Shasta had never seen it from such a height, and never seen so much of it before, nor dreamed how many colors it had. On either hand, the coast stretched away, headland after headland, and at the points you could see, the white foam running up the rocks, but making no noise because it was so far off. There were gulls flying overhead, and the heat shimmered on the ground. It was a blazing day, but what Shasta chiefly noticed was the air. He couldn't think what was missing until at last he realized that there was no smell of fish in it. For of course, neither in the cottage nor among the nets had he ever been away from that smell in his life. And this new air was so delicious, and all his life seemed so far away, that he forgot for a moment about his bruises and his aching muscles and said, "I say, Bree, didn't you say something about breakfast?" "Yes, I did," answered Bree. "I think you'll find something in the saddlebags. They're over there on that tree where you hung them up last night, or early this morning, rather." They investigated the saddlebags, and the results were cheering. A meat pasty, only slightly stale, a lump of dried figs, and another lump of green cheese, a little flask of wine, and some money, about 40 crescents in all, which was more than Shasta had ever seen. While Shasta sat down, painfully and cautiously, with his back against a tree, and started on the pasty, Bree had a few more mouthfuls of grass to keep him company. "Won't it be stealing to use the money?" asked Shasta. "Oh," said the horse, looking up with his mouth full of grass. "I never thought of that. A free horse and a talking horse mustn't steal, of course. But I think it's all right. We're prisoners and captives in enemy country. That money is booty or spoil. Besides, how are we to get any food for you without it? I suppose, like all humans, you won't eat natural food like grass and oats." "I can't." "You ever tried?" "Yes, I have. I can't get it down at all. You wouldn't either if you were me." "You're rum little creatures, you humans," remarked Bree. When Shasta had finished his breakfast, which was by far the nicest he had ever eaten, Bree said, "I think I'll have a nice roll before we put on that saddle again," and he proceeded to do so. "That's good, that's very good," he said, rubbing his back on the turf and waving all 4 legs in the air. "You ought to have one too, Shasta," he snorted. "It's most refreshing." Shasta burst out laughing and said, "You do look funny when you're on your back." "I look nothing of the sort," said Bree. And then suddenly he rolled around on his side, raised his head and looked at Shasta, blowing a little. "Does it really look funny?" he asked in an anxious voice. "Yes, it does," replied Shasta. "But what does it matter?" "You don't think, do you," said Bree, "that it might be a thing talking horses never do? A silly, clownish trick I've learned from the dumb ones? It would be dreadful to find when I get back to Narnia that I've picked up a lot of low, bad habits. What do you think, Shasta? Honestly now, don't spare my feelings. Do you think the real free horses, the talking kind, roll?" "How should I know? Anyway, I don't think I should bother about it if I were you. We've got to get there first. Do you know the way?" "I know my way to Tashbaan. After that comes the desert. Oh, we'll manage the desert somehow, never fear. Why, we'll be inside of the northern mountains then. Think of it, to Narnia and the north. Nothing will stop us then. But I'd be glad to be past Tashbaan. You and I are safer away from cities." "Can't we avoid it?" "Not without getting a long way inland, and that would take us into cultivated lands and main roads, and I wouldn't know the way. No, we'll just have to creep along the coast. Up here in the downs we'll meet nothing but sheep and rabbits and gulls and a few shepherds. And by the way," What about starting? Shasta's legs ached terribly as he saddled Bree and climbed into the saddle, but the horse was kindly to him and went at a soft pace all afternoon. When the evening twilight came, they dropped by steep tracks onto a valley and found a village. Before they got into it, Shasta dismounted and entered it on foot to buy a loaf and some onions and radishes. The horse trotted round by the fields in the dusk and met Shasta at the far side, and this became their regular plan every second night. These were great days for Shasta, and even better, every day was better than the last, as his muscles hardened and he fell less often. Even at the end of his training, Bree said he still sat like a bag of flour in the saddle. And even if it was safe, young'un, I'd be ashamed to be seen with you on the main road. But in spite of his rude words, Bree was a patient teacher. No one can teach riding so well as a horse. Shasta learned to trot, canter, to jump, and to keep his seat even when Bree pulled up suddenly or swung unexpectedly to the left or to the right, which, as Bree told him, was a thing you might have to do at any moment in a battle. And then, of course, Shasta begged to be told of the battles and wars in which Bree had fought with the Tarkan. And Bree would tell of forced marches and fordings of swift rivers, of charges and fierce fights between cavalry and cavalry when the war horses fought as well as the men, being all fierce stallions, trained to bite and kick and to rear at the right moment so the horses' weight as well as the riders would come down on an enemy's crest in the stroke of a sword or battle axe. But Bree did not want to talk about the wars as often as Shasta wanted to hear about them. Don't speak of them, youngster, he would say. They were only the Tisrock's wars, and I fought in them as a slave and a dumb beast. Give me the Narnia wars where I shall fight as a free horse among my own people. Those will be wars worth talking about. Narnia in the north, bra-ha-ha, broo-hoo. Shasta soon learned, when he heard Bree talking like that, to prepare for a gallop. After they had traveled on for weeks and weeks, past more bays and headlands and rivers and villages than Shasta could remember, there came a moonlit night when they started their journey at evening, having slept during the day. They had left the downs behind them and were crossing a wide plain with a forest about half a mile away on their left. The sea, hidden by low sand hills, was about the same distance on their right. They had jogged along for about an hour, sometimes trotting and sometimes walking, when Bree suddenly stopped. "What's up?" said Shasta. "Shh," said Bree, craning his neck around and twitching his ears. "Did you hear something? Listen." "It sounds like another horse between us and the wood," said Shasta, after he listened for a minute. "It is another horse," said Bree, "and that's what I don't like." "Isn't it probably just a farmer riding home late?" said Shasta, with a yawn. "Don't tell me," said Bree. "That's not a farmer's riding, nor a farmer's horse either. Can't you tell by the sound? That's quality, that horse is, and it's being ridden by a real horseman. I tell you what it is, Shasta, that's a Tarkan under the edge of that wood. Not on his war horse, it's too light for that. On a fine blood mare, I should say." "Well, it's stopped now, whatever it is," said Shasta. "You're right," said Bree, "and why should he stop just when we do? Shasta, my boy, I do believe there's someone shadowing us at last." "What shall we do?" said Shasta in a lower whisper than before. "Do you think he can see us as well as hear us?" "Not in this light so long as we stay quite still," answered Bree. "But look, there's a cloud coming up. I'll wait till that gets over the moon, then we'll get off on our ride as quickly as we can down to the shore. We can hide among the sand hills if worst comes to worst." They waited till the cloud covered the moon, and then first at a walking pace and afterwards at a gentle trot made for the shore. The cloud was bigger and thicker than it had looked at first, and soon the night grew very dark. Just as Shasta was saying to himself, "We must be nearly at those sandhills by now," his heart leaped into his mouth because an appalling noise had risen suddenly up out of the darkness ahead. A long, snarling roar, melancholy and utterly savage. Instantly, Bree swerved round and began galloping inland as fast as he could gallop. "What is it?" gasped Shasta. "Lions!" said Bree, without checking his pace or turning his head. After that, there was nothing but sheer galloping for some time. At last they splashed across a wide, shallow stream, and Bree came to a stop on the far side. Shasta noticed that he was trembling and sweating all over. "That water may have thrown the brute off our scent," panted Bree, when he had partly got his breath again. "We can walk for a bit now." As they walked, Bree said, "Shasta, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm just as frightened as a common, dumb, collar-mean horse. I am really. I don't feel like a talking horse at all. I don't mind swords and lances and arrows, but I can't bear those creatures. I think I'll trot for a bit."